in March, at least.
Welcome, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah.
I mean,
Amen.
And we are going to find a screen share
yeah,
here.
Ottoman.
And we're just starting chapter 47. So,
Mm.
Vayavo Yosef. So remember, Joseph had told his brothers that he was going to go speak to Pharaoh, and that when Pharaoh inquired of them, they should tell him that they're herdsmen, and that way they would be settled in the land of Goshen. And here we were told how sheep were worshipped, essentially. The Torah doesn't put it quite like that, but that's our understanding from many contexts, that that is what they meant, was that the sheep were worshipped. And of course, that sort of foreshadows the reason why they took the lamb and slaughtered it and placed its blood on the doorpost. That's a foreshadowing. Vayavo Yosef, so Joseph came, v'yaged leFaro, and he told Pharaoh, Vayomer, and he said, Avi v'achai, my father and my brothers, v'tzonam uv'karam, and their sheep and their cattle, v'chol asher lahem, and all that they have, ba'u me'eretz Canaan, have come from the land of Canaan, v'hinam be'eretz Goshen, and they are at this point in the land of Goshen. There is no Rashi on that. Miktzeh echav lakach chamisha anashim, and from some of his brothers he took 5 men. Vayatzigem lifnei Pharaoh, and he set them up before Pharaoh. He had them stand before Pharaoh. It's Rashi on this, extensive as you can see. Umiktzeh echav, so some of his brothers, not all of them, but some of them. So Rashi starts off with min hapachutim shebahem, and he said that literally means from the least of them, the least, the weakest, in other words, ligvura, as far as strength was concerned. So those who were least strong, she'en nirim giburim, who did not appear to be heroes, mighty men. She'im yir'eh otam giburim, because if he, that is Pharaoh, would see that they are mighty men, that they are heroes, yaseh otam anshe milchamto, he would he would make them serve in his army. They would be soldiers. He'd make them soldiers. Ve'ela hem Reuven, so specifically who are these 5? Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, Uvinyamin. Otam shelo kafal, and Rashi explains those whom Moses did not repeat their names, Keshebirchem, or when he blessed them at the end of Deuteronomy. So whose names are not repeated in that bracha. Aval Shemot HaGiburim, but with regard to the names of those of the tribes, those individuals who were valiant, kafal, he did double. Vizot lihuda, so he now gives examples. So vizot lihuda, vayomer shama Hashem kol Yehuda. So, uh, so Judah, of course, is a valiant person, and it says when Moses blesses him, it says, and this for Judah, and he said, "Listen, O Lord, hear, O Lord, the voice of Judah." So you can see how Yehudah is repeated. He's giving every example he can think of. Ulagad Amar, and to God he said, Baruch Marchiv. God, um, blessed is the one who expands God. Ula Naftali Amar Naftali. So you see the repetitions of these names. Ula Dan Amar Dan. This is again a quote. And Ludan Amar Dan. V'chein Lizvulun. V'chein La'asher. That's he's simply making a reference to these 2 tribes. Zeh Lashon Bereshit Rabbah. He says that is the language of, or the text of Bereshit Rabbah, Shehi Agadat Eretz Yisrael, which is the Agadata of the land of Israel. And few years ago, I was made aware the fact that the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, has pretty much no Agadata at all, whereas the Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, which we study far deeper, has a lot of Agadata, and we're talking about folkloristic, midrashic material. The Talmud Yerushalmi basically focuses on the analysis of of halacha, of Jewish law, and there is a theory that Bereshit Rabbah, which is extant, is in fact the Agadata of the Talmud Yerushalmi, that it's simply in a separate book, but that nevertheless it does exist. So Rashi is pointing out himself that the Midrash Rabbah is the Agadata of the land of Israel, and that's of course where the Talmud Yerushalmi has its origins. Aval b'Gemara Bavlit Shelanu, but he says, but in our Babylonian Gemara, and he makes the reference to Baba Kama Tsamik Bet, Baba Kama, page 92, Matzinu, we find she'otam shekafal Moshe shmotam, that those tribes where Moses doubled their names, Hachalashim, they were the weak ones. V'otan hevi lifnei Pharaoh, and those are the ones he brought before Pharaoh, the ones he mentioned that had their names doubled. He said that in the Bavli that's understood as a sign of weakness. V'Yehuda, and with reference to Judah, who you would be surprised to hear was weak, he says, Shehuchpal Shmo, whose name was doubled, Lo huchpal mishum chalishut. He says Moses did not repeat the name of Yehuda, even though he repeated it. It wasn't repeated because of Judah being particularly weak. Elatam yesh davar, but there's another reason for this. Kedeita b'Baba Kama, as is mentioned in, I assume, this passage in Baba Kama, u'Baraita di Sifrei, and in the Baraita of Sifrei. Sifrei is a Agadic, a halachic midrash, and in this Baraita, in the Sifrei, they mention this too. Shaninu ba, we also read about this. Bevezot habracha, that is to say, in the passage in the Sedra Bevezot habracha, kamo beGemara shelanu, just as it occurs in our Gemara, we read a similar midrash in Sifrei, that the tribes where Moses doubled their names were the weak tribes, with the exception of Judah. Now Rashi does not mention here this other reason why Judah's name was doubled, and I checked the Siftei Chachamim, and the Siftei Chachamim says it's because Judah's bones rattled in his coffin during the 40 years of wandering, and Moses took special care of that. Again, of course, there's significance as to what that represents. Does it represent the fact that Judah was doing tshuva for what he did because he instigated the sale of Joseph? I do not know. I can't tell you, but that's the best I can imagine, because I wouldn't think, I don't know, rattling the bones, what does that imply? Does it imply Judah couldn't wait to get in? You know, that his whole being was dedicated to entering the land of Israel? I'm just not sure. I haven't read an explanation of that symbolism there. And let me just make sure, right? So we don't have a lot of Rashis on this at this point. Vayomer Paro Elechav, so Pharaoh said to his brothers, Ma Masechem, what do you do? What's your occupation? What are your occupations? Vayomru El Paro, and they said to Pharaoh, Ro'etzon Avardecha, your servants are sheep herders. Gam anachnu, gam avotenu, not only us, but our forefathers as well, our ancestors as well. Vayomru El Paro, Lagur ba'aretz banu, and they said to Pharaoh, to sojourn in the land we have come. Ki ein mir el letzon, for there is no pasturage. for the sheep asher la'avadecha, which belong to your servants, ki chaved hara'av be'eretz Canaan, because the famine is very severe in the land of Canaan. Va'ata, and now, yeshvuna avadecha be'eretz Goshan. Let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. Vayomer Paro said, El Yosef Lemor, he said to Joseph with these words, Avicha va'achecha ba'u elecha, your father and your brothers have come to you. Let's just make sure. Okay. Eretz Mitzrayim lefanecha, the land of Egypt is before you. B'meitav haaretz, in the best of the land. Hoshev et avicha ve'et achecha, cause your father and your brothers to dwell. They should dwell in the best part of the land, right? Yeshvu v'eretz Goshan, let them dwell in the land of Goshen. V'im yadata, and if you happen to know, here we go. V'yeshbam anshei chayil, that if amongst them are valiant men, v'samtam sarei mikneh al asher li, and you shall place them as head shepherds, officers of my cattle, al asher li, that belongs to me.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I don't understand it. There's a famine in Israel, in Egypt too. How can the cows and the sheep, what are they going to eat? There's no growing the stuff unless they have the grain that Joseph's going to give them.
Yes, that's right. That's a very good point, Harlan. So I don't know that, that in those particular years there was much pasturage available, but they still had to eat, right? So I imagine what he's saying is just put them in charge. Just put them in
Oh,
charge. Make sure that your brothers are in charge of my cattle, my sheep and my cattle, and to make sure they're well taken care of. That's what I think is what he's simply saying. Okay. So, so Anshe Chayil, right? When we have the word Chayal, normally we think of soldiers, right? People in the military. And so Rashi wants us to understand that Anshe Chayil here does not mean that. It just simply means Beki'im be'omunatan lir'otzon, that they are expert in their craft of herding sheep. Allah Sherli, over that which is mine, al son shali. So specifically, of course, it means over my flocks, over my flocks. Vayave Yosef et Yaakov aviv ve'amideu lifnei Pharaoh. So Joseph brought Jacob his father, and he had him stand before Pharaoh. Vayivarach Yaakov et Paro. So it does say here Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and I think I always took it at its literal meaning. However, take a look at Rashi. Vayivarech Yaakov, Jacob blessed. He she'ilat shalom. It's simply saying he was inquiring of his welfare. That's what it has to do with. Kederech
oh,
kol hanirim lifnei hamlachim, as is the custom of those who appear, all those who appear before kings, lafrakim, from time to time. And he has a nice French word here, salude, and in Yiddish, it's grisen. So, in other words, he was greeting Pharaoh, and it wasn't that he was necessarily blessing Pharaoh in that formal sense
I
that
don't
we
think
would
he.
understand. He wasn't doing that. So, let's go back here. Vayomer Paro el Yaakov, Pharaoh said to Jacob, Kama memei shnei chayecha, how many are the days of the years of your life? Shnei. Okay, let's see. Is that the part? No. Vayomer Yaakov el Paro, Jacob said to Pharaoh, Yemei Shnei Megurai, the years of my sojourning, my wandering, Shloshim Ume'at Shana, are 130 years, literally 30 and 100 years. Me'at, Me'at V'ra'im Hayu, few and Oh gosh, bad, literally. Hayu yemei shnei chaya were the days of the years of my life. Velo hisigu et yemei shnei chayei avotai, and they did not reach the days of my ancestors, my fathers' lives. Bimei
What was
megurehem. 1 second, Harlan. During the days
what
of
was
their wandering.
Abraham's years, and what was
So
Isaac's years?
right. So Abraham, I happen to know, 175. He was
Oh,
175, and Isaac was actually 185, I believe, or 180.
oh,
180. Yeah.
okay.
So I am actually going to we'll go. Yeah. Let's just finish this up. All right. Vayetze milifnei Pharaoh, and so Vayivarech Yaakov et Pharaoh. So it's possible that here it has to do with blessing Pharaoh. Vayetze milifnei Pharaoh, and he left the presence of Pharaoh.
So
One
are you,
sec. 1 second.
going to go back and do that Rashi for the last verse?
Yes, excuse me. I'm so sorry. Yes, let's go on to the Rashi. Shloshim, sorry, that's the Epstein, right? Here we go. Shnei Megurei, the years of Megurai of my sojourning, because they weren't settled anywhere. That's the point. They lived as nomads. Yemei Gerutai Kol Mayai Hayiti Gar Ba'aretz. So I think there might be a mem missing here. Yemei Megurotai, that is, that all the days I was a ger, a sojourner in the land. Velo hisigu, and they did not reach. And Rashi says it's not so much the years themselves, but betovah, in goodness. Now, the word tovah can also refer to completeness, but regardless, he's talking. It appears that Rashi is talking about the quality of those years. So now we've got, here we go, Vayivarech Yaakov, Jacob blessed. And again, Rashi feels a need to explain this. Kederech kol haniftarim milifnei sarim, just as is the practice of all those who depart from princes, from nobility, mevarchim otam venotlim rishut. They bless them and they get permission to leave. They need to request permission to leave. Uma bracha barcho. Okay, and with what blessing did he bless him? Sheya'aleh nilus leragalav, that the Nile should rise, leragalav. Could mean up. Well, it could literally mean up to his legs. Okay, it may refer to the Nile itself, and it could, I think it could also have the sense of reliably, right? That it should do it. But let's see, Lauren, anything there?
Mine says the Nile should rise at his approach,
Ah, nice,
like
nice.
rise to
Okay,
greet him.
okay, we'll put that in there. Thank you. I would not have assumed that. Let me see what I have here. There we are. Okay, I'll put that in right now at his approach. All right. And there's no context to help you understand that, but that's good. Lefisha ein Eretz Mitzrayim shotam min megeshamim, because the land of Egypt does not literally drink the water of rainfall. It has no rainfall. Ela nilas ola umashke, but rather the Nile rises. In other words, it floods its banks, etc. Umashke, and it waters. Birchato shel Yaakov, and from the blessing of Jacob va'elech, and from that point on, Haya Paro ba el Nilus, the Pharaoh would come to the Nile, v'hu ola ole likrato, and it would rise to greet him, umeshke et haaretz, and would water the land. In other words, the entire land. And this is from the
This was
Midrash.
before the famine, though, wasn't it?
Say that again. I'm so sorry.
This was before the famine. I mean, the Nile was drying up during the famine. I mean, there was no rain, no nothing.
Well,
I
there
mean, they
wasn't rain
depended on
at
the
all,
Nile for
but
water.
apparently, yeah, they weren't. Or it could be other kinds of things. It could be that there was disease. The crops were diseased. I mean, you talk about the
Hmm.
potato famine in Ireland. I believe it wasn't because there was inadequate rainfall. It's just that there was some disease, I think, that affected the potato plants there. There's also
True.
tradition, and it's possible that Rashi will mention it, that when Jacob arrived in the land of Egypt, the famine ended early, that it did not take 7 years.
Oh,
And we're going to go back and see Shnatayim Hara'av. There's a verse where Joseph is addressing the Egyptians, etc., because they're running out of grain. We'll wait until we get to that, and that's probably, with God's help, will be next year. At any rate, there is this tradition that the famine ended early when Jacob and his sons came to Egypt, and in fact that the reason why Jacob wanted to be taken immediately back to the cave of Machpelah was so that the Egyptians would not treat him as a god. So that's there, and at this point I am going to end the session. And okay, so we're at Shvi'i. Next time, we certainly have made a lot of progress. Sorry, I just need to get rid of that. Okay, and we'll mark this in here. Very good. So I'm gonna stop the share and stop the recording.